Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome to the second webinar of Conway. We're going to talk about the growth engine today. So let me start up the presentation. All right. We're basically starting where we left off last time with webinar number 1 on omnichannel. So today we'll be speaking more about the execution. E-commerce growth engine. Right. First, a quick introduction about ourselves. So Conway & Co. And then over to the webinar. We are a boutique consultancy of experts in digital commerce, and we focus on strategy, technology, and data. And what we believe is basically, and that's what we learned from our own experience, is that a scalable company functions as a system, and technology serves as its backbone. So it's basically the thing that enables the company to scale and to grow. And how we often visualize that is that if you don't use an operating model, it's very challenging to scale up, and it basically feels like reinventing the wheel. And that's also what we help our clients with, to go from chaos to calm, basically. And we help them to implement an operating model, which technology is very important. And I'll focus on that a little bit, which part of the operating model we're going to tackle today in this webinar. Our background is as digital executives ourselves. So we've worked at leading omnichannel companies like Ace and Tatum Food Supply, but also for the past 2 years, we helped a lot of consumer brands to scale up. On the one hand with their strategy, but also with the technology stack. This is a bit more about us, but I'll also share the slides later so you can review that. Our main promise is that we will get you fit for growth. And that's something that we've feel more comfortable with than actually delivering on growth, because the growth is mainly also up to you and your team. And I think that's where our promise is focused on, is getting you fit for that. Most of our clients are investors and executives, but also digital leaders, so e-commerce managers, product owners of these companies themselves. And often they're somewhere between 20 and 200 million in that scaling up phase. Just some examples of companies that we work with. Loft is an interior brand that does a lot of online, but also offline. They have a very impressive footprint on social, especially Pinterest, and they convert that into that content, they convert into commerce, and they build a real nice community around that online and offline. Similar to Lekker Bikes is also an omnichannel brand. They sell e-bikes across multiple continents, so Europe, and Australia. And we've also helped them with their technology stack, and that has really accelerated their growth. Similar to Bolt King, which is a shaving brand, they were struggling with a technology stack that was a bit outdated, a lot of custom things in there, and technology has really progressed, so we also help them to advise on how to build that technology stack. So over to the topic of today, the webinar. We're going to discuss the e-commerce growth engine today. And one step back first to the operating model again. What is an operating model? An operating model is basically a blueprint like a building, but then for your company. It's a system that basically defines how a company works. And it's a really helpful tool to better understand where the challenges are within your company. So it could be on the strategy side, on the data side, but also on the core of the operating model, the processes, technology, and people. Last webinar, we focused on the strategy side of things. So the omnichannel, so where and how do you basically sell? And how do you keep track of that customer, and how do you still connect and build a relationship with them? The video of that first webinar is on YouTube, so feel free to watch that again. But today we'll be focusing a bit on different parts of the operating model. So the data side, so how do you measure the performance of your efforts, and also how do you move your strategy into action? So that's basically where the execution thing comes in. And the growth engine, that's what I'll explain today. It's basically a mechanism to drive long-term growth. So this is a quick breakdown of what we'll focus on today. We'll do a bit of a recap of last time in terms of the value proposition. So the value proposition is basically the products and services that you sell to customers. The core formula, so the business model formula, is a very important tool to align your team around the same scoreboard, as we often call it. And then we go over to the growth engine itself, which is a mechanism, which I'll explain further as well. And part of that growth engine, there's an acquisition funnel. So there's the acquisition funnel that brings new customers into your growth engine, and then you have retention and referral tactics that basically keep the customers in. So that's the dynamic that you should be looking for. And then also we'll touch a bit on the metrics model. So how do you actually measure the performance of the growth engine itself? So are you doing the right things, and how do you balance the acquisition versus retention, for example? All right, over to the value proposition. Again, this is a bit of a recap of last time, but I think it's important to settle on that as well. So the value proposition for selling direct to consumer, I think that's a very important thing, and I'll explain that further, why it's important to own the end-to-end experience, but also to own the customer relationship. And then a very helpful way to look at this is by what we call the 3C flywheel. And I'll explain that a bit further with one example. If you want to learn more about this, again, go to the first webinar. But what we basically aim to do is to combine content, commerce, and community in a holistic experience that enables you to grow the business. So a really good example of that is Rafa. They create a lot of content for using their products. So, for example, where to ride. That's under the stories tab you see here on their website. That enables you, that inspires you to use their product more often. So you get great engaging content for that. That enables you to that enables you to buy more. And then basically when you go to those rides, you also bring them together in the community. So that is sort of a ongoing process that is really helpful to grow the business. And I think it's an important decision to make, and especially when we go further into the growth engine, is to define what type of brand or company are you, and what type of tactics suit that brand best. So to make it very, like, in a very clear differentiation, you would have a more functional and a more experiential brand. The functional brand is often more like a commodity purchase, right? So something like a supermarket, like Action, which is a big one here in the Netherlands. Or it's more a considered purchase, which is often more the case with an experiential brand. And this categorization, obviously, it's not as clear cut as you can see here. Probably you're somewhere in the middle, or some products are more on the functional or more on the experiential side. But it's good to take that into account, because that really determines which type of tactics you should be using. And also at a high level, if you look at the bottom layer of this table, it's often a decision between demand capture and demand generation. Demand capture is more used for established categories, so people have already decided what they want to buy. They just want to decide where to buy it. Often the Google ecosystem is very well suited for that, right? So the SEO and SEA tactics. And then as an example, on demand generation side, people haven't really realized that they need or want this product. So you need to generate the demand for them. And that's where often the Facebook ecosystem is more well suited. So Instagram ads, for example, right, with very rich content. And a famous example here is that you've never really decided, hey, I want to go buy a t-shirt, right? So it is often something, especially in the fashion world, where you get triggered for, hey, this is actually something that I would like to buy. And that's the difference there. All right, then over to the strategy. And this is more sort of the highest level aim that we have. The highest level aim for the strategy, and I will break that down in the other components of this webinar. The highest goal for the strategy is basically to create that growth engine, and the purpose of the growth engine is to acquire customers for less than that they would be worth for the lifetime value of your company. And all these components I'll explain further as well. The explanation you see here on the right basically is the summary of what we'll be doing today, so I won't read it out loud, but it serves as a summary if you read these slides later. And another ratio you see here on the left is the LTV versus CAC ratio. Again, I'll explain that later as well, but there is a correlation, and often it's said if there's a 3-to-1 correlation, then or ratio, then you're doing well. So the first step is to define the business formula. The business formula is a very simple thing, and it's easy to remember, but it really serves as a unified scoreboard for your team. And if your whole team unifies behind that scoreboard, it's really good to drive momentum, and everybody knows what they need to be doing and need to be focused on. And as I already said, is that the theory around this is quite simple. However, the execution is the hard part. So the performance of your growth engine is measured by the commercial impact, measures the commercial impact on your business. And where this really helps is to align your team around it. So that's why I want to go a bit deeper into that formula. The formula looks like this, and it basically consists of drivers and levers. The things you see here now are the drivers, so the traffic, the conversion, so traffic times conversion times average order value. and that equals the revenue. And obviously that's the thing that you're after. However, we often see, and I think that's very important in the current day and age, not just revenue is the thing that comes out of your business operations or your business model, your footprint as well. So your CO2 footprint. And if you combine all these things together, we have an important thing to also measure is a measurement for the customer experience. And NPS is often a metric that's used there quite often. NPS stands for Net Promoter Score. So how likely would a customer recommend your product or your service to a friend or someone else? So how likely would they promote it? And it's a good measurement for the end-to-end experience. So that's why I've put it on top right. So if you look at these drivers, and these letters are a bit small, but again, these slides are also going to be shared later. The drivers are the components that define the commerce formula and its outcome. And the question is, how do you influence those drivers? That's what the levers are for. So those are specific actions that you can take to influence those drivers. So for example, at the traffic, that's mainly categorized around media and distribution, right? So that would be around expanding to new channels, improving existing channels. Or increasing AOV has a lot to do with the product and the assortment. So improving your merchandising, for example. And if you look at it this way, you can delegate or assign specific components to specific roles within your team. It creates a lot of clarity. So that's why this formula serves as a scoreboard, and it actually serves as a scoreboard for, are your efforts going in the right direction? Does everyone in the team know what to do, and are you making the progress that you want to see? All right. Yeah, and I think this is just a quick summary there. What is the thing about long-term growth? And I think that's one of the most important things. Is that happy customers that refer new customers are your best marketers. So this referral engine can't be bought and can only be earned. And therefore, that's what we see as long-term growth. So the growth engine itself, I'll try to explain that a bit further as well, because that's the main topic of today, and that's the main thing that we're after currently. As expressed earlier, the growth engine is basically a mechanism that drives long-term growth, and that long-term also stands for sustainable growth. And what we mean by that is that it's not a one-time activity. A one-time activity might be like a TV campaign or something like that. That might be a part of your acquisition funnel, but that's not a mechanism by itself. It creates a surge of customers, but it doesn't really have long-term impact, because when the TV campaign is gone, yeah, it can jumpstart your growth, but it can't really sustain it. What we're looking for here is an actual mechanism, a system that enables your team to drive continuous, sustainable, long-term growth. So a growth engine is characterized by one simple rule: new customers come from the action of past customers. The simplest way to visualize that is with this visual. What you see here on the red side is the first two phases of the growth engine, the awareness and the acquisition stage. And that's the acquisition funnel. So that's often where the marketing team is focused on. And that's in the upcoming section, I'll explain that further, but that's basically where you have different types of content that follow the see, think, do methodology. So that's the first part. The second part is where the green triangle goes from activation to revenue. And that's often where the sales team is focused. So there, the most important thing is to help customers make purchase decisions. So it's not so much about selling; it's a subtle difference, but it really, aligns on what actual the goal is. And if they then do convert, so when they drive in revenue, they enter your customer base. From there, you can do a lot of data analysis on what type of profile they are. You can create automated life cycles, for example, and that's where the third triangle comes in. So that's where retention and referral tactics drive more revenue. And what you see here is that it is sort of a visualization of the growth engine itself and all these different categories of tactics that you can incorporate into your business. So that's also why you see the arrow going back from keeping customers in. So that's basically the process in which you reactivate sleeping customers. Another important part here is connected to the channel component of this. That's the thing that you see here, the goal of marketplaces, goal of retail, and goal of the web, and the rent versus owning your customer. What we mean by that is that when you sell something via wholesale or via a marketplace, you do not own the customer relationship. It's basically owned by the marketplace. For example, Amazon, right? So Amazon owns your customer. You provide the product to Amazon, where you sell it via Amazon, but you don't own the customer relationship. That's owned by Amazon itself. That's very different from if it's an owned direct channel like retail or the web, because the biggest benefit from that is that you own all the customer data and therefore also the customer relationship. That means you can you can implement new retention tactics like automated life cycles, and I'll explain that a bit further as well. What I mean with customer data are all these different components. So within a customer data profile, there's all these different ways to gather data around the customer. Obviously, there are demographics, but there's also preferences. There is specific behaviors. There are, for example, wish lists that they've created on your website. All these things are a component of the customer relationship. And this customer relationship is very important to drive the retention based on the data. So that's one of the reasons why it's very important. That's even why we call it a principle. Obviously, renting customers and wholesale and marketplace, as an example, they play a role in your channel mix. However, it is important to find a way to actually also start owning the customers for the reasons I just explained. So the principle would be own your customer versus renting them. Then going a bit deeper into the red part of the growth engine, the acquisition funnel itself. So how to find new customers to feed into the growth engine. Well, before you can retain the customers, you need to bring them in a predictable way. And I think that's one of the key challenges. And there's no real expert that can really tell you how to do it. It's more about a process. And that's also the third part I'll explain here. The acquisition funnel basically represents the journey of potential customers, how they interact with your brand. So there's multiple touch points there. And that's often visualized as a funnel. And a leaky funnel, as they call it, basically means that somewhere in that funnel, they're dropping out. So they're not transitioning into the next stage. And that's what you would like to prevent. If you visualize that, so this is the same triangle, but then flipped on from its side. The acquisition funnel is basically feeding the growth engine. And I think the most important point I can make here is how much content this is going to require. So we often call it like a content factory. And that is a key capability you need to develop within the organization. Because just growing from an organic perspective is not going to work anymore. You need a lot of content to push to the algorithms of the different feeds of social media, for example. So it's always a combination of content and paid media to actually create that visibility with your audience. And it goes from top to bottom, right? So you start with the awareness, then the acquisition, and then the activation phase. And this is also the methodology, and I think it's actually coined by Google. So the see, think, do step-by-step approach. First, they see the first interaction with your brand, and the objective there is to create brand awareness. And the messaging is often quite inspirational. And this also touches on the table I showed earlier. It's basically where you generate demand. Metrics to look at are basically reach or social engagement, because that is helpful. That will give you an indication of if you're being successful there, yes or no. Second step is the acquisition. So that's basically where people start, after seeing, they start thinking about, hey, is this a product I need? Is it a product I'm going to consider to buy? This is often more called campaign content. The objective there is to explain your value, and it's already a bit more product focused and less brand or vision focused. Then the third phase is around actually doing something. So you're trying to trigger the customer into converting in some way, either a soft or a hard conversion. And the objective there is actually selling your product or your service and reactivating specific customers after they've entered your customer base. So when they have purchased with you for the first time. And here you also see it going from demand generation to actually demand capture. And the messaging is going to be a lot more commercial. And then the last step is actually retaining that, right? So that's when you look at the other triangles where the green triangle comes in again. You've converted, so have purchased with you, and then they enter the automated life cycles, for example. So a welcome cycle or an NPS cycle after the 2 weeks after purchase, things like that. Oh, and one thing before I forget, this is also where the content commerce community part comes in, right? So if you create your value proposition around these three components, so what is the content that we're creating around our brand to keep you engaged, like the Rafa example, where to write, for example. The commerce part is where actually you start selling things, And the community part is how you keep your customers in, right? So that's basically where the retention part comes in. So it's a really interesting way of looking at it, and it's often a good rule of thumb to remember. And the principle for this acquisition funnel, again, I think it shouldn't be too much about selling, because that's a very bottom funnel approach. It's about helping people making purchase decisions across that funnel. So even from the awareness phase, bringing them down to the acquisition phase, and in the end also converting something. All right, then over to the next section, the metrics model itself. So how do you measure the performance of your growth engine? So if you've been able to set this up, you have defined a few of these tactics. How do you actually measure the performance? I think one important thing to remember is that acquiring new customers is always going to be more expensive than reactivating the old ones that you already have in your customer base. Because acquiring new customers means that you either need to pay Mr. Zuckerberg at Facebook, or some other gatekeeper basically to broadcast your message again. If you already own the customer data, so if you have your email address or a physical address to send a direct mailing, for example, those are new ways to reactivate existing customers that are already in your customer base. And this metrics model that we'll explain a bit further as well is to give you insight into how to balance these things between acquisition and retention, enabling you to decide where to allocate your time and your budget best. And often, obviously, when you're earlier in your development cycle, you don't have a large customer base yet, it doesn't make much sense to spend a lot of time on retention tactics. First, try to figure out this predictable way of acquiring customers. And if you do this well, it basically creates a flywheel of long-term growth. And that's what I'll explain in the upcoming slides as well. So the mechanism for long-term growth is basically defined by this ratio that we already discussed in the intro. So the ratio between the lifetime value and the acquisition cost of a customer. And if that ratio is greater than 3, it's considered a good ratio. And a business example of this ratio is an example provided by the Corporate Finance Institute, and it basically follows this formula. And it's a good thing to remember. And again, this ratio of 8 is quite good or quite high. If you're around 3 or above, that's already a good way to approach it. And the great thing about this is that if you visualize this in this graph, basically what you see is that it becomes more profitable over time, because your customer base and therefore your lifetime value will continue to increase if you can keep your acquisition cost under control, right? So then you create a snowball, which you see here in this graph. All right, then over to more specific metrics model of the engine itself. And these 9 metrics you see here are often quite a lot debated, and it depends a little bit on the phase of your company and the size of your company, if it actually needs to be these 9. But I would advise to keep it at a small number at least, right? So currently what I would advise, and again, you're obviously welcome to change, but you can already start with these 9. For the marketing part, where you actually start attracting customers, traffic, acquisition cost, and the engagement, which can best measure by a cart abandonment, for example, or an add to cart engagement as well on the traffic. Those 3 are really good measurements for the marketing part. Then the sales part, conversion rate, average order value, and lifetime value are also important ones, and to measure engagement further down the funnel. And then later for your service team, it's always good to measure NPS, returning customers. So are you actually able to retain, and are your retention tactics working? So are you creating that growth engine step by step? And customer interaction is an important one as well, because there's a strong correlation between the amount of customer interaction, so people sending a support ticket, for example, and the amount of products or orders that have been fulfilled. If that gets out of hand, that is something that can really hurt your business. So it's important to keep track of that. Also in terms of return rate, right? So if there's a lot of returns coming in, that's going to kill your margin. So therefore, these 9 are a really good way to align your team around that unified scoreboard that we discussed earlier. And this is a bit more detailed version of that. The third principle for the metrics model itself is the acquisition cost is basically the new rent is the new rent of the online world. And what we mean by that is that in the offline world, you used to have rent of a physical building before you could sell something. And in the online world, it's somewhat different, right? So I often say in the offline world, it's more like fishing. You basically sit by a stream where there's a lot of customers coming by already, and therefore the rent of your physical store is going to be higher. In the online world, there's not really a shopping street. So you need to pay to get people to your store that is somewhere on the internet. And that's where the acquisition cost comes in. So the more effective you're able to do that, so the lower your acquisition cost can be, the more profitable and therefore the more successful you'll be. But that's why we often refer to that as a principle. Acquisition cost is similar to rent of the offline world. And also to reiterate that, the core purpose of the digital growth team, and I'll show you a bit further how what that the digital growth team can look like. But I think this is a very good briefing to them, basically, right? So it's not just about selling, which is a bottom funnel tactic. It's basically about helping people make purchase decisions, and that's also where the content comes in, right? So if there are specific opportunities to explain things around your product, that is always going to be helpful for your customers, right? And it's also, I think, the analogy to be made when you walk into a store and there's a helpful person there that is also guiding you on your path to purchase, basically. So why not do the same thing for the online world, right? So provide them with good infographics, provide them with good explainer videos. These are all things that help people make purchase decisions. And in a way, step by step, you remove friction from the customer journey. So if you do that well, those are the processes that you need to implement in the digital team. So what does a digital team actually look like? It's a cross-functional team that operates the growth engine. So the growth engine we already explained. And now what type of team would you need to actually deliver on that growth promise? The funny thing here is that basically every company or every e-commerce or consumer company starts as a cross-functional team. And because you always have, for one role, everybody's at the table. So you would have a digital marketer, a product person, like all these people are sitting around one table. And when a company grows, they often sort of break off into functional silos, right? So then you have a separated marketing team, a separated sales team, a separate service team. In the beginning, it's just basically one person doing everything. So I think that's often a reason why smaller companies are able to move faster and also to execute more effectively. And I think one of the most important things and downside of that is that siloed teams, so siloed functional teams, don't really have the customer in mind. The customer journey is basically united by marketing, sales, and service functions, as I already showed you in the growth engine. And it's very important to bring those people together, because if you bring those people together in a cross-functional team, you really set them up for success and set them up for exceeding customer expectations, because it can basically own the end-to-end funnel. And a way to visualize that is that if you look at a high-level customer journey, you see these steps here going from unaware to aware, to buying something, to receiving it, and potentially having an incident, so sending it back as well. And then the rebuy part is basically where they get reactivated, so they reconsider to buy something from you. And in these red blocks on the bottom, you basically see all these different teams that are there. And again, when you're small, there's not separate teams. There are just one person doing everything. And that is basically a cross-functional team by itself. But the bigger the company gets, often they get more siloed. So I think that's really something that we've learned, is that you need to keep these people together. You don't have to do a complete reorganization, but you can at least set up a cross-functional team to meet once every week or bi-weekly or something like that, to at least work together on the backlog of the different tactics that you're trying to deliver. I won't go through all the different roles that you see here, but I think one important thing to explain is that, again, to bring together marketing, sales, and service, and what we often call as a abbreviation, the PEDMAC setup. So it's product, engineering, design, marketing, analytics, and content. If you have all these three things, all these three skills together, you're going to have a very effective team. And again, in the beginning of a lot of e-commerce companies, it's basically one very talented person that can do all these different things. And step by step, this person starts to hire specialists for the different roles. So a specialist analyst, a specialist acquisition marketer or a specialist retention marketer. And that's also where it gets tricky, because if all these different roles are not within one team anymore, or they're spread across different departments like marketing, sales, and service, you're not going to have a effective organization anymore. All right, then over to the growth backlog, which is a very important process to get up and running. And the growth backlog is basically a list of new tactics that you would like to test and to see if they work for your brand. Because the goal here is a predictable growth setup. So it's basically, if what we've learned is that it's about finding people that already agree with you, right? I think that's the demand capture side of things. And then to help them make that purchase decision. And something that I can tell you from my own experience, there's no real expert or specific agency that will magically be able to predict what will work for your brand. They often can learn from specific tactics that work for other brands, but you always need to test and try it out for yourself, because your messaging is going to be different, your product is going to be different. So the best way to do that is to basically adopt a build, measure, learn loop. And a build, measure, learn loop is just a way of working. It's a way of working that helps you to understand which tactics will actually work for your own brand. And the structured way of working looks something like this. So you build something, and with building, I mean implementing a new feature, for example, or getting a specific new tactic up and running. Then you measure the performance of that new tactic with qualitative or quantitative insights. So qualitative being talking to customers with a UX review, for example, or quantitative in terms of analytics data or insights, so conversion numbers or things like that. So, but always take a qualitative and a quantitative approach. Based on those learnings, you will improve. So you will either stop a specific tactic, you're going to add a new tactic. But this is the ongoing way of working you need to adopt within the team. And the goal, again, here is to find predictable growth tactics that work for your specific brand. What I'd like to do now is share 3 examples. And that also show how to go from strategic, defining objectives, which is often done by the digital leadership team at strategic level. And then at operational level, it's basically a team of professionals that focus on executing those tactics. And you can visualize that in a pyramid like this. So this would fall into the category of a retention tactic. So I named it for now increasing lifetime value. Increasing lifetime value is some of the strategy of your, that's sort of the top level thing that you're trying to achieve, right? So increasing lifetime value of your customer base, which is decided by the priority of the digital leadership team. They set a specific objective for that. So double the number of repurchases of your customer base. That would be the objective. And then they hand it over or work together with the operational team of professionals. For example, a retention marketeer or a CRM marketeer is sometimes called as well. To send personalized messages to reactivate specific segments of your customer base. You can use a RFM analysis for that, for example, a recency, frequency, monetary value, to cut up your customer base into different segments, and then tailor the specific messaging towards those different segments. This is a very specific and a specific skill set. So again, sometimes when the team is smaller, there's not really a differentiation between strategic and operational. It's just one person doing everything, basically. But later, it's important to realize this, and that's also something that you can consider either bringing in-house or outsourcing a specific expertise or skill. And then the action following that tactic is to send an automated offer to reactivate people after 200 days since their third purchase. As you can see here, a very specific thing, right? So you're not going to send a automated offer like a discount to your full customer base. No, you're going to select a specific segment to cater that specific offer to. And this is a very powerful tactic to increase lifetime value. The second example is for driving inbound traffic, so more on the awareness side on the awareness category of the growth engine. It's basically about driving inbound traffic from people with a high buying intent. That will be the strategy. The objective could be increase traffic with 20% with a stable conversion rate. Why that is important is that if you just drive traffic with a low buying intent, it's very low quality traffic. So that's why it makes sense to incorporate that in the objective, not just increase traffic with 20%, but also maintain your conversion rate, right? Because otherwise your conversion rate will drop. A tactic that you can use there is to create a video series with a high-profile influencer. Here we thought of an example with Messi, for example, right? Just as an example. So the action following that specific tactic would be, hey, launch a video campaign on YouTube with Messi on how he uses his new soccer products, basically, right? So it's a way to raise awareness, and then hopefully will drive inbound traffic towards your website. Third and last example here is more a push outbound tactic. So you're going to push an outbound message at the activation stage of the growth engine. So that's more about demand capture. So it's really a bit more bottom funnel in that sense. So as said here, the strategy is to grab attention because it's more outbound setup of a specific new lookalike audience of the data that you already have within the system. And you do that with a paid outbound campaign. So again, the objective would be to raise conversion because this is a more bottom funnel approach. You actually target people with a high buying intent. You do that via paid social, for example. That's often where these sort of evergreen campaigns keep running. And then the action following that specific tactic is to actually implement evergreen or always on campaigns on Instagram that optimize for add to cart events, right? So that is a way to measure if this traffic that's coming in, does it have a high buying intent, yes or no? Then the growth backlog itself is basically a list you continuously update and you share with your team. So you rally them around the business formula that we discussed. You delegate specific metrics to the people within the team. And then together, when you are on your bi-weekly meeting, you sit for that the growth backlog. You define, hey, which growth tactic we're going to work on the upcoming 2 weeks. Which part of the funnel is it actually focused on? What is the goal with this? Is it more demand capture or demand generation? The impact effort analysis always helps as well. You shouldn't obviously put too many high effort tactics in your backlog. Obviously, high impact, low effort is the ideal way to do it. But yeah, you always need to make decisions, or you need to assess what is best for you at this stage. And then you also list the specific metric that you're after. So either lifetime value, traffic, or conversion. And in this way, you really create a structured way of working that you can keep adding stuff to your backlog, and then say, hey, now this is something that's relevant. We have a bit more time and budget available. Let's add this new tactic and let's work on this together with our cross-functional team. Then the next step is basically the what do you do after you have your growth engine, let's say not so much under control, but when you have this process up and running. The growth engine is really focused on growing the core, right? So growing the core of your value proposition. So those are the things that we already discussed in the business formula. So driving more traffic, driving repurchases, expanding new audiences. That's all within the the scope and responsibility of your existing growth engine. And the steps you can take later are actually expanding the market, expanding the catalog. So that means adding more channels, adding more countries, adding maybe even more business models, right? Like a subscription model, for example. But those are things that you need to really well consider, because you always have a constrained capacity of time and budget. So it's just a way of looking at different growth drivers. And hopefully the approach that we share today will help you to make decisions on that. Right, then over to the conclusion. I think I just wanted to reiterate some of the principles that we've shared today, and also some of the guidelines that will help you set this up. I think one of the main conclusions is that long-term growth requires a structured way of working, and this build, measure, learn loop is a central part of that as well. The ability to find these growth tactics will work for your brand is, I think, the main thing that you're after. It's not a magic solution that someone is going to give to you. It's going to require hard work and a focus to actually find what is working specifically for your brand. Aligning everyone behind that same scoreboard is a very important thing to do. And then getting this process of the build, measure, learn loop up and running with that cross-functional team is going to be the real asset. Because if you have that up and running, you basically can adapt to any new thing that's going to pop up in the external world, or the things that you will have to deal with. And a very important thing, and that's often where we step in and help out with as well, is that you need to have a technology stack that provides the rails to that customer journey, right? So all the different pieces of software, from your marketing automation system to your commerce platform to your service hub, all these things need to work in sync and need to be integrated and connected. That's what we call a technology stack. That's also where we can help and set it up and to get you fit for growth, as we already discussed. To do that well, that basically provides the infrastructure for the growth ambition that we discussed today. All right, to summarize the 3 principles for the growth engine. Remember to own your customer versus renting them. For the acquisition funnel, try not to just sell, so not just bottom funnel, but help them to make purchase decisions. So creating a lot of interesting content to transition them down the funnel, basically. And then for the metrics model, I think one of the most important things is to realize that your acquisition cost basically feels like the new rent in the online world. So it's a way to to assess and to understand how do you get this growth engine up and running. And it's always going to be a balancing act between the acquisition cost and the retention, and where do you put your focus. All right, that's it for the second webinar. Thanks a lot. Feel free to reach out. These slides and the video recording will be shared over email as well. Now let me see if there's any specific questions I needed to tackle for now. No, nothing yet. All right, cool. Well, thanks, and hope to see you next time.